So I've heard doctors say to patients, like, it's all in your head and it's in your nervous system, right? You're not making these things up. It's not like you're just like coming up with this. Like there's really something happening. So I think it's, if you're working in a situation where you're going to be in extreme stress constantly, you have to, one, understand how your nervous system, what's actually happening inside of your body. It cannot be a luxury to do things for yourself, to take care of yourself and do things to help relax you or engage the parasympathetic nervous system and calm the sympathetic nervous system. You have to do that because it will directly affect your health. The CDC says like 80% of the diseases we have are stress related.
That is Dr. Luke Reinhart. I am Catherine Alonso. This is Change in You. Welcome here or welcome back. This is a podcast for people making change in their communities, in the world, in their own lives. And this season, our first season of Change in You, is all about overcoming obstacles to change. And one of the very biggest obstacles to change that all of us face, it's a universal experience, is stress. Dr. Luke Reinhart is a chiropractor. He runs a practice, Proactive Health and Wellness, in Ohio. And he really leads us through what is stress, what is happening in our body when we experience stress, what are the different kinds of stress, and what can we do about it. And he really talks about being a chiropractor and offering chiropractic services to people and how it can really enhance our wellness and change our lives. This is such a powerful conversation. I have researched and read a lot about stress, and this conversation was just slightly different for me. The concepts might be familiar, but the language is new and fresh, and I think offers a really powerful way for us to think about how stress lives in our bodies and what we can do about it. So I really hope that you find value in this conversation, and without any further ado, Dr. Luke Reinhart. Luke Reinhart, welcome to the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for joining me. I'm really excited to dig into this really important topic. But before we do that, why don't you go ahead and tell me a little bit about you, what you do, and your journey to this point in your career?
Yeah. So I'm a chiropractor by trade. I'm a 2006 graduate of Palmer College of Chiropractic in Davenport, Iowa. And I think when I graduated chiropractic school, I was like most guys when they graduate chiropractic school, like you want to be like on the sidelines of your favorite sports teams, right? Working with the athletes. And so that's where I started my career. And, over time, it slowly started to shift, but it made the most dramatic shift when my son was born, right? And, you go away from like, okay, I can't spend every Friday night on the football field. I need to be home with my son, right? And you start to shift your practice away from being the guy who's an expert in sports to feeling like, what am I going to do to make sure this little guy's got the best chance that he has to thrive, really? And my journey started to shift towards pediatrics, but it really made the most dramatic shift in 2017. So my guy was, he's probably like 5 years old by then. When one of my mentors, his name is Dr. Tony Ebel, he has a practice in Crystal Lake, Illinois. He started talking about something he called the perfect storm, where we see a lot of kids with neurosensory type of issues, like focus issues, anxiety, ADD, ADHD, sensory processing issues, and even on the autism spectrum. And he was finding through the technology that he was using and we use now, that there was a high correlation between how our body is managing stress and a lot of these conditions. And a lot of those actually tie back to stress and even trauma during labor and delivery for a lot of these kids. And so once we started learning about how a body that's stuck in fight or flight, who's constantly running away from the grizzly bear, like I talk about in a TED talk that I did, they have a variety of health issues. The core really comes from a balanced stress response. So I guess we can talk about that a little bit later. But as I started to learn about this, and as I started to really kind of see this direct correlation and like put these pieces of the puzzle together on how stress directly affects our health, just became obsessed with it. We have a clinic in just outside of Columbus, Ohio now that myself and we have another doctor in our office that we see about 400 patient visits a week. And it's all really based on, it's a chiropractic office, but it's all based on stress. and how do we actually change how people's nervous systems can adapt to stress? How do we get them out of a chronic state of fight or flight to just give them the best opportunity for health?
Wow. Okay, there's a lot I want to break down here. So let's start off by talking about how stress is defined. So how do you define that word?
So stress, for what we do in our office, I guess is maybe the best way to put it. When I say stress, most people first off, they think emotional stress, and that's the biggest one, right? It's the biggest one. I also, when I say stress, I don't necessarily say stress in a bad context. We can have good stresses as well. We need to have some of those. But stress, emotional stress, physical stress, and chemical stress, they all put some degree of stress on our body that our body and specifically our nervous system have to adapt to. When we look at how our body manages stress and adapts to stress, it's all in the nervous system. The brain, spinal cord, and nerves that branch off the spinal cord. When we look at the peripheral nervous system, the nerves that are outside the brain, right? The spinal cord and the nerves that branch off the spinal cord. Our entire nervous system is broken down into two halves, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And how our body works is when we have stress, when we have the physical stress, the emotional stress, or chemical stress, the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight nervous system, its job is to turn on so we can either fight the stress or run away from it, right? It doesn't matter if it's like an actual stress or even we perceive it as stress and maybe it's not. The sympathetic nervous system goes into that fight or flight as a protection mode. The other set of our nerves are called our parasympathetic nerves, and they work as our brake pedal. Their job, mainly a nerve called your vagus nerve that hangs out off of our brainstem. It's the major parasympathetic. There are some other ones, but that's the major parasympathetic nerve in our entire body. The analogy I give that kind of maybe explains this a little bit better and maybe puts more context around how this is important with our health is it's a bear in a room analogy. I ask all my patients, I ask them first to grade their stress levels. Where would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10? And more often than not, oh my gosh, it's an 8. Oh my gosh, Dr. Luke, it's been a 10 these past couple of weeks with my stress at work. I've got 4 kids at home. It's every day it's a 7, right? So imagine there's a bear in the room. Imagine you have stress, right? This emotional stress, physical stress right in the room with you. What happens to our body when we encounter that stress? We turn on the fight or flight response, right? Our heart starts racing, beating out of our chest. We pump adrenaline, other stress hormones. We tense up. So we try to fight the bear or run away. And while we're running away from the bear, are we worried about taking a nap? No, right? We're not worried about digesting the hamburger we had for lunch. We're not worried about fighting off COVID. We're not worried about recovery from an injury that we had when we hurt ourselves a couple days ago. And we're not worried about hitting developmental milestones, right? When we're running away from a grizzly bear, it is 100% protection mode, which is the job of that sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. Mm-hmm. So you ask me what stress is. Really, anything that engages the sympathetic nervous system is a stress on our body.
I see.
Now, when the bear is gone, when we've run away, right? The parasympathetic job is to turn off that fight or flight response, to bring us out of protection mode and back into recovery, growth, and development mode. They're in control of sleep. They're in control of digestion. They're in control of immune system function. And we talk about any kind of recovery from any kind of injury, any kind of growth and development. It all happens on the brake pedal side. Neurologically, our brains and our nervous systems cannot be in growth and protection mode, recovery mode, and protection mode at the same time. So inevitably, when I know that I am seeing in my office a physical manifestation of stress, meaning, hey, this is what I hear. Dr. Luke, I had this injury to my back 6 years ago, and it's just been lingering ever since. The question in my mind is not like, okay, well, the question that I have is, well, why isn't their body recovering? What's limiting them from recovering? Because I have other people who I tweaked my back a little bit, and by the next day I woke up and I was fine. It's stress. We can't be in protection and recovery mode. The biggest thing I see when people tell me I've had this problem forever and it's not getting better is to some degree they're stuck in fight or flight, right? Mm-hmm. And inevitably when I know it's a stress, then my next question, well, how's your digestive health? Oh my gosh, my gut's a mess. I'm constipated all the time. How's your immune system health? Oh my gosh, my kid's always sick. I'm always sick with them. How's your sleep patterns? Well, it takes me about an hour to get to sleep and I wake up 2 or 3 times a night. And it's been like that forever. Those are all physical manifestations of being stuck in a constant state of fight or flight. And so we should be able to, ideal situation is we should be in and out of fight or flight all day, right? Here's a stress, go into fight or flight, stress is gone, come out of it. So when we take a big step back, really anything how do we define stress? Really anything that engages the sympathetic nervous system is what is a stress to you? And that's that's a better question, because it's a bigger question, and it's really an individualized answer.
So there's a bunch there that I want to dig into that you just shared. One of the biggest things that you just said there that really struck me is that stress in itself isn't bad. Like, we're supposed to experience stress. It's a part of life. It's not about avoiding feeling stressed. Where we get into trouble is when we get stuck in that sympathetic nervous system and we don't go back over to parasympathetic. Or put another way, we get stuck in fight or flight and we're not recovering. And then what you said is that growth and protection can't happen simultaneously, which I think is such a powerful concept. The idea that if you're in protection, if you're in that fight and flight, you are not able to get back over to or if you are not able to get over to parasympathetic, then you can't grow. So how do we stop getting stuck there?
That is the $1 million question right there. So there are a lot of ways. As a chiropractor by trade, the research in chiropractic is really showing that there's a direct correlation between spine function and brain function. And post-adjustment, we're turning on a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. We're re-engaging what's called the vagus nerve, that vagus nerve we talked about, the parasympathetic nervous system, and turning off their fight or flight response. In our office, we measure that. I have a tool called heart rate variability. And I think that maybe once again, there's obviously access issues for everyone. This isn't maybe something that everyone can do, but heart rate variability is something that if you have an Apple Watch, it actually measures, right? There are a lot of chiropractors now that measure heart rate variability, and there's various ways you can do that. But I guess the first thing is you want to make sure that you kind of know where you're at, right? You want a high variability. So heart rate variability, what does that mean? Our heart rate changes as we breathe in and breathe out. When we take a deep breath in, our lungs expand. It puts stress on our heart, and our heart rate should speed up to some degree, go into fight or flight, right? Mm-hmm. And then when we exhale, our lungs deflate. It takes stress off of our heart, and ideally our heart rate should actually slow back down to some degree. So that variability in our heart rate as we breathe should be very high. We should have a lot of change as we breathe in and breathe out. When we have low variability, when our heart's always beating the same all the time, that's more of an indication that you're stuck in a state of fight or flight. Low variability is bad, high variability is good. So the first thing that I really suggest that if people think this is a problem and they have the opportunity and they have access to something like this, to check your heart rate variability. That's the best way that we've found so far to directly measure your stress in real time. And then once you have a baseline, which once again, this is what we do with every single new patient, and we do it periodically as they go through periods of care. Once we have a baseline, then we can actually put these ideas into play to how do we re-engage the vagus nerve? How do we improve vagal tone and see if it works, right? Chiropractic is the one way that I found is the fastest way to change that. So the adjustment re-engages that part of the brain, helps you come out of fight or flight, and just helps balance out your nervous system. It's easiest way for people to do something. They can do something passively, right? Yeah. So, and then I can have conversations with my patients too to make sure that one, we're doing things that start to come out of fight or flight. The adjustment's one, but two, are we putting ourselves back in situations that we continually re-engage the sympathetic nervous system chronically? You can't avoid everything, right? If your husband and your kids and your spouse and your family all stress you out, you can't necessarily kick them to the curb. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that, right? If you have a job, you can't just walk in there and say, hey, I'm done with you guys. You're stressing me out. I mean, maybe you should think about getting another job, but you can't just walk in and say, I'm done with you, right?
Right.
So there are ways we can look at and strategize on how to limit those. But outside of that, right, there are other things. We talk about some of the jobs of the sympathetic nervous system, right? When we're running away from a bear, right? Some other things that happen to our body is we actually push blood to our arms and our legs so we can have energy and have the resources to run or fight, right? And so what also happens is for example, when it's wintertime and it's very cold, we actually need to push that blood back to our internal organs to go protect our internal, because if we're freezing and we get frostbite and we have to lose an arm or a leg, we can, we don't want that, but we can lose an arm or a leg and survive, right? So another job of the parasympathetic nervous system is called vasoconstriction, to push blood from our arms and our legs back to our core to help survive. It has to use the parasympathetic nervous system to do that. So something as simple as one of the big fads right now is taking these like cold baths and taking cold showers and things like that. It's not the funnest thing in the world, but man, I tell you what, like I've done that and I slept like a baby.
Yeah.
It's great, right? One of the things that the parasympathetic nerve does, the vagus nerve does, is help engage your diaphragm. So a lot of times when people do something as simple as breathing, we don't even think about breathing, but I see people all the time breathing with their shoulders. Right? Yeah. Leave your shoulders alone and try to breathe from your diaphragm, right? That engages the vagus nerve. Now, once again, I think chiropractic is the best one, but there are other strategies you can do that are simple, like taking cold showers or breathing from your diaphragm, that also can re-engage the vagus nerve to help passively turn off that fight or flight response and re-engage the parasympathetics to help work on that. But until you have a baseline to know where you are at, it's hard to really measure these strategies, because you can, and other than maybe like looking at your sleep patterns or looking at your digestive patterns or things like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I'm imagining if breathing, shoulder-free breathing is something that can calm you down, then I'm thinking about things like meditation, gentle stretching, yoga, activities that encourage you to really engage the breath.
Yeah. Or even something as simple as things that you enjoy, right? Does it give you pleasure? Does it make you hey, you know what, Dr. Luke, whenever I go take a walk in the woods, and I'm at peace and I'm quiet for like an hour and I can just think and I can meditate or I can pray and read the Bible or do whatever you need to do. I mean, most of the time we know what relaxes us.
Yeah.
Do those things.
Yeah. Well, and I think you make a really good point of like not being able to remove stresses. So if you're working in social change, if you're trying to make change in the world, there is an inherent stress to that kind of that kind of work. First of all, you are more likely have close proximity to suffering. So you are working on the front lines with people who are struggling day in, day out. You see some really sad stuff and really sad chronic stuff that is not going to get better. And your work is really about alleviating as much suffering. But oftentimes folks who are working in those kinds of industries feel like they're putting a Band-Aid on, a gaping wound. So that's one thing, is the proximity to suffering. And then the other thing is just the reality that if you're working on a social problem and you're trying to fix it, it inherently is not going to be easy. It's a long path. And also for those folks who have dedicated their careers and their work to that kind of work, it really matters to them. So it's high stakes. It feels very high stakes. The path ahead is long and depressing. And then there's the day-to-day exposure to seeing people suffer. And so that is stressful. It is inherently stressful. And, you always have the opportunity to choose to change your career path. But if you don't want to do that, then what you're doing is you're providing us some really great tangible tactics and tools that you can use to manage that stress in the meantime.
Yeah, I think that it's for people who work in those types of industries and have a passion for that and really want to make a change. And they know that they are going to be in a situation where they encounter trauma, and I guess leave it at trauma because that's the best word for it. If they're going to be encountering that on a daily basis, I think having a deeper understanding of how stress affects your body is going to be vitally important for those. And taking those measures it's not a luxury.
Yeah.
Right. We see a lot of times these things as a luxury, and it's not, right? It's not. Like, we need to have a really deep understanding of stress and how it affects our body. We have to understand that it's not something that's like just in your head. So I've heard doctors say to patients, like, it's all in your head and it's in your nervous system, right? You're not making these things up. It's not like you're just like coming up with this. Like, there's really something happening. So I think if you're working in a situation where you're going to be in extreme stress constantly. You have to, one, understand how your nervous system and what's actually happening inside of your body. It cannot be a luxury to do things for yourself, to take care of yourself and do things to help relax you, to calm your sympathetic nerve or calm your parasympathetic or engage the parasympathetic nervous system, and calm the sympathetic nervous system. You have to do that because it will directly affect your health. The CDC says like 80% of the diseases we have are stress related. What does that mean? It's people who are stuck in fight or flight and can't recover from the stress.
Yeah.
If you're in a stressful situation every single day and have no opportunity to recover from it, it's gonna destroy your health, physically and mentally. So I think there has to be a very deep understanding of how stress affects your health. And there has to be a very conscious effort of how do you do things? How do you have strategies in your life to help your nervous system manage that stress? Because it will add up over time, right? There's something called neuroplasticity that we're finding that nerves that fire together wire together. Yeah. And if you're constantly in a state of fight or flight all the time because of the environment that you're in, your nervous system will be hardwired to always be in fight or flight forever. So
and it's just,
yeah, exactly. And then it just snowballs from there.
Yeah, snowballs from there, and it manifests physically, and you feel that within your body. And presumably the impacts of that are serious and long term. Well,
so once again, the parasympathetic nervous system is in charge of sleep, digestion, immune system function, and recovery, right? So how many chronic gut digestive issues do we see in patients? All the time. All the time. Like how many, like this, there was a study in the beginning of COVID that they actually measured vagal tone, how the vagus nerve worked, how well the parasympathetic nervous system worked in people who had COVID. And they found in that research that people with low vagal tone, people whose parasympathetic nervous system wasn't doing their job, had worse outcomes. They got more sick. They had more severe symptoms. Every single patient that I've had who had like long COVID, all were stuck in fight or flight. And we were so scared. And once again, I'm not downplaying it. I don't want to make it seem like you shouldn't even worry about this at all, right? Obviously, pay attention to it. Talk to your doctor about it. But at the same time, there was so much fear around getting it that we were so scared that the health outcomes were so much worse than they are now. Now, if someone gets COVID, like people are like, oh yeah, I had COVID. I was sick for a couple of days and I got it, because we're not scared of it. And once again, please don't take it that I'm downplaying the disease process. But when we have a balanced nervous system, when we're not scared, we're not anxious about catching this disease, and we understand what it is, and we understand we will have better outcomes because of that. So it 100% affects every aspect of our health. If we can't recover from a disease process or a sickness, then it's devastating.
Yeah. I'm curious too about your thoughts on identifying what is causing you stress. So sometimes it's obvious. Like sometimes there's a huge shift in our life. Someone gets sick. A family member joins the home, leaves the home. You have a new project to work. You have a new boss, and there's this huge shift. And that it's causing you stress. My personal experience has sometimes been that I feel stressed out. I feel it in my body. Things aren't going the way they should. And I'm not exactly sure where it's coming from. Either nothing huge has changed, or something that hasn't caused me stress in the past is causing me stress now. And I'm not sure why. And I'm curious on your thoughts about getting to the bottom of like what's actually causing the stress in your body.
Yeah, that's a great question. So once again, in our office, we do a test called heart rate variability. The data that we collect in our office gives me more usable data and more data than maybe just necessarily what an Apple Watch will. A lot of times I find that, and I talked about this in my TED Talk, that we have a capacity for stress, right? So ideal situation, we have stress, we go into fight or flight, stress is gone, we go back into recovery mode. Ideally, we should be in recovery mode like 90% of the day, and in protection like 10% of the day. And when we're able to get into recovery mode, when we're able to sleep, when we're able to recover, our reserves for stress are generally pretty high. I have found more and more patients who get stuck in a state of fight or flight, and they're always in protection mode and they're never in recovery mode. And over time, it drains their reserves, which the reserves we actually measure with our technology as well. And so the lower the reserve, the lower the opportunity for you to manage stress. Mm-hmm. So what I typically find is with low reserve, small stresses can create overwhelm or anxiety. It may not necessarily be that you have a new stress that you don't think about, but what may be happening is your reserves are so low, you've been stuck in fight or flight, even if it's low level, right? Maybe you're not like completely like anxious, need whatever all the time, but maybe you just always been a little bit in fight or flight and you've been like that for a decade. And it's just completely drained you. And you get to the point where, gosh, you know what? This never used to bother me. This situation never used to bother me. But for whatever reason right now, like this happens and I just lose it.
Yeah.
Right? I can't take it right now.
Right.
With low reserve, we see a lot of times there's a correlation between low reserve and anxiety issues. Once again, when in my TED Talk, when I started my career, I started out working for an office and went to like 2 different offices. And long story short, after about 8.5 years into my career, I came to the decision that it was time for me to open up my own business. And it just so happened that my wife was about like 4 months pregnant when I went and sat down with her and said, I think I want to quit this job where I'm making a very nice salary and we're very comfortable. And I want to actually go more in debt to buy this business that I've never actually really done before. And I'm not sure how much money we're going to be able to make right off the bat, but I think we need to do this. And so
not stressful at all.
That's not stressful at all, right? So I bought my practice that I'm in now on March 11th, 2015. Or I'm sorry, it was Friday the 13th when I did it, which was comical in and of itself. It had to be this way so I could have this story, right? You have to go through this. This is probably why I'm so obsessed with this, because I've been so stressed out. But on March 13th, 2015, I purchased the practice. And then 11 days later, my second son was born 5 weeks premature. And that's some stress.
Yeah, I bet that is incredibly stressful.
So he's we're going to a soccer tournament this weekend. He's 8 years old. He turned out great. He was 5 weeks early, but we got to take him home 48 hours after he was born. Wow. And so now we have this new baby that we have to set an alarm every 2 to 3 hours to wake him up, because he didn't have the neurology to be able to wake him up he wasn't able to tell us he was hungry yet because he was so premature. And I took over this business, and once the doctor who owned the business left, so did most of the patients. And so I get obsessed with this because I was there, right? And this was like a time in my life where it was crazy stressful. And the small stresses for me in that time in my life, I had like almost a breakdown where I wanted to cry. I was anxious. I wasn't sleeping at all. My gut was a mess, right? Yeah. And it took, and we're here now, and we have a thriving business, and life is good. But because I was in that state where all my reserves were just tanked, I had nothing. Yeah. Things that right now would not even faze me would just like completely shut me down.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I know that's kind of a long answer, but I think that what that situation I see more often than not is maybe not necessarily that you have stresses that you don't know about. Most people know what stresses them out, but it's that you lack the reserves to really adapt to those stresses. People with high reserve, they encounter stress, manage it, move on. Yeah. It doesn't affect them.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a big implication of that for working with other people and how we manage stress in teams. So, of course, we work together with our coworkers or with our family, our friends, whatever. We're dependent on and connecting with other people all day long. And I certainly have had the experience at work where somebody is incredibly stressed out by something that I don't quite understand why that thing is stressful. And same vice versa, that I'm stressed out and I perceive that maybe the people I'm working with don't quite understand why I'm so stressed out. And I think it's exactly what you're talking about, that everybody's in a different position with the reserves that they have and, you know, how stress is manifesting in their life. And so how do we support one another, communicate with one another about stress? How do we help people who we perceive are stressed when, you know, you can't fix other people's problems?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a great question. I mean, I get to put my hands on people, right? And that's my gift, I guess. So I don't know if there's a great answer for that right now. I think you have to go in. I think I maybe have a different concept of this because I know there was a season in my life where I was stressed out, and I know I said some stuff to people that I'm like, why did I say that? I would never say that in a normal time. Yeah. But now I guess I have, and when I have, for example, this is maybe simplistic, but we see a lot of new parents in our office. We see a lot of pediatrics. We see a lot of kids in our office. And my pediatric practice took off when I became a parent because I was able to sympathize and connect with the parents who were struggling in that situation because I had been there.
Yeah.
So I think that once you have been through some stressful events, once you've had maybe some trauma in your life or you've had an event that has been sticking with you, I think it gives you perspective. And I think we need to kind of go into really every conversation that we have with anybody with the understanding that we don't know what they're going through right now.
Yeah.
Right. We don't know where they're at. I had a patient one time that she came in, she was having some neck pain and some arm pain, and she started getting adjusted, feeling great, arms doing good. We go into maintenance care, we're seeing her, and she'd probably been under care for like 2 or 3 years. And it was like, hey, it's been a long time since we've done a set of scans with you. I just want to do a set of scans and just see where you're at, see how things are going, just make sure everything's going great. Perfect, great. We do the set of scans, and they were a mess. They were terrible. Every single time we did these scans in our office, better. She's getting better. She's feeling better. And now, like, she's been under this maintenance care. She tells me she's doing great. What's going on? And so she comes in, and I have all these printouts of all these scans and these last ones. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening. I don't honestly know what's going on. You've been doing so great, and you're stressed out. You're exhausted. Your scans look a mess. And she starts breaking down crying. She's like, I just found out my daughter has cancer. Right? Yeah. So yeah, you're stressed out. You look like you're stressed out and exhausted because you're stressed out and exhausted.
Yeah.
Right. And had I not had that tool, she might not have ever told me that.
Right.
Right. She's not a person who wants to just open up and is going to tell me everything. And she doesn't want to give her stress to me.
Right.
She wants to internalize it. She's a strong woman, and she doesn't want anyone else to have to bear that cross for her. But I think we need to be open with people and let people know because people want to care. But we also have to understand that people aren't going to tell us their stresses. And when they react like that, we have to understand that maybe there's something going on that they're not willing to tell us right now. And we just need to care for them anyway.
Yeah. And also we all, I think, it's called fight or flight for a reason, right? You are surviving, you put your head down and you do what you have to do to get through the day. And one of the very first things you said is it starts by paying attention to what's going on and knowing that you are in a stress response and that you're stuck there. And it's pretty difficult to do that if you're not paying attention to how it feels, you know. And so these two things are in conflict. The having to get your head down, put your head down and get through it is in conflict with what's going to help, which is paying attention and knowing that we're in stress. So I don't know what we do about that.
But on the same token, if we didn't have a fight or flight response, it would affect our health as well. Right? It's there for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? It's there for when we need to fight that grizzly bear.
Right.
You want to talk about a mama bear who's worried about her cubs? She's going to use that fight or flight response to save her family.
Yeah.
Right? You want to find out how to get out of a situation you need to survive? If we did not have the fight or flight response, we wouldn't be able to. Mm-hmm. So it's there for our benefit. The fight or flight response isn't bad. We shouldn't, we need to have that. But we need to also have consciousness and understand that we need to also, if we can't live there.
Yeah.
So they're both important. We can't have one without the other. They're in conflict and they can't work together, but we need each of them to do their job when appropriate.
Well, I think that's a really good reminder because it's all mindset's so important. And so knowing that actually this stress response does serve us, we just need to make sure that we're in the driver's seat.
We talk about people who are in situations like in social justice things, we need to have that, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be times where we're going to have to fight.
Yeah.
If you want to see that change, use that sympathetic nervous system. But you also, you have to have some to be able to use it.
Right.
Right. If your reserves are low and you're tanked, when you need to fight, you're not going to be able to fight.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. So if anyone's listening and they're feeling like they're in that stress response, whether it's acute or it's ongoing at a particular level, where would you advise them to start?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think chiropractors and specifically chiropractors, I guess there are really two types of chiropractors. There are some chiropractors who are neck pain, back pain specialists, which is awesome. They do great work. And there are some chiropractors who are more wellness oriented, who want to measure stress response, who can take a little bit deeper look and look at some of your neurology that you don't necessarily feel and analyze that. I think chiropractic is really leading this because I don't know of any other professions who are really talking about this. I don't know anybody else I've seen some like on Instagram, I've seen some like natural wellness providers who talk about sympathetic and parasympathetic. But I think chiropractors are really leading the way on how our body manages stress and being able to actively change and balance out our body's stress response. And I think that that's the best way. If I ever find a better way to change someone's stress response, I'll probably start doing that. But it's pretty darn good at what it does. So I think that's a great place to start for people. We use a technology in our office called Insight Scans. And they have a provider portal of doctors who use their scans. Really, that's another great place to start. Like I always tell people when people ask me, like, can you help me with such and such? My daughter has this one. My husband's been having sleeping issues. My every response to every single person is like, I don't know. Let's take a look and just see. Right.
Yeah.
And once you get a baseline by a chiropractor, or even if you have something like an Apple Watch or something that measures heart rate variability, you need to get a baseline to just see where you're at first.
Yeah.
Maybe you're great. Maybe you don't. Maybe you actually are doing better than what you think. But if you're not, if you have low variability, then you can start using some of these strategies we talked about today. Or really, there's a ton of information on the internet looking at how to change your stress response, how to improve vagal tone. That's something I would look for. And then find it, test it, check it again and see if it's working. But that's the great place to start. If you're looking for a physician, I think chiropractors, specifically ones that do the scans that like we do in our office, are posed to help this. But if not, find a tool you can measure heart rate variability, get a baseline of where you're at. And then whatever you decide to do, you can actually measure it over time to see if it's working.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Luke, thank you so much. This has been so incredibly helpful, and I can't wait to get dug into this. I think that you've given us something really fresh and different to think about, and I'm really grateful to you.
Yeah, thank you. I nerd out when we talk about all this stuff. So I try to not use like prefrontal cortex and brain talk too much, but you can't tell. I really enjoy having these conversations because I think that there's got to be a shift. We know that there's a lot of challenges with our current medical system. And I think we need to change the way that we think. And I think that the forefront of that conversation needs to be a focus on how our bodies manage stress. And if we can change that, we can change a lot of health problems.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I got so much out of that conversation, and I really hope that you did too. I loved how Dr. Luke Reinhart shared with us what stress is, how it lives in our body, the connection between brain health and spine health, and how chiropractic work and chiropractic practice can help us. And it's a new thing for us to try. I know that I'm going to be looking more into the connection between our spine and wellness and how chiropractic practice might be able to help. But I really hope that there was something tangible in this episode that you can introduce into your life right away. Even if it's just by starting by thinking, what's going on in my my life right now? Where am I causing stress? Do I feel like I'm moving outside of that stress response, that sympathetic nervous system every single day? Am I getting out of it? And if I'm not, what can I do about it? It's a really important question. And in your change-focused work, whether it's on a personal level or in your community, you're definitely going to need it because stress is guaranteed. And as we heard, it's not bad for us. We actually need it. So how can we make sure that it's working for us and not against us? One reminder that if you go to catherinealonzo.com, there is a worksheet that is all about figuring out your own core values. And it might seem that there's not really much of a connection between core values and stress, but I have found that if you know what your core values are, you're closer to knowing what's most important to you, and by prioritizing the things that are most important to you, you really can start to dismantle and manage and respond to the stress in your life. So I encourage you to go to catherinealonzo.com, check that out, and please let me know if you have any questions. I'm always here for you. Other than that, I look forward to seeing you next time.